Isang mapagpalang araw sa ating lahat. Welcome back again sa ating channel and welcome back for another lecture in the subject matter personal identification techniques. So for today's topic, we will be talking about the concept of fingerprint impression. So by the way, before we start, I would like to inform everyone that meron tayong module for this. You can just look into the description and download the file that I save on the Google Drive. Okay? So, ang pag-uusapan natin ngayon is part of the Unit 3 of the subject matter, and that is with regards to the fingerprint impression. We have here the different topics that we will be covering on this lecture. We have yung first topic natin will be the kinds of fingerprint impressions. And the second topic that we will be talking about is the kinds of chance impression, which is, yung chance impression is a type of the fingerprint impression. But it's important that we should talk about the different classification of chance impression na tinatawag. Then we have also the topic, the methods of producing fingerprint impression. So, without further ado, let us proceed with the different kinds of fingerprint impression. So it's important that we should be familiar with regards to the different impressions as far as the field of personal identification techniques is concerned, and specifically in the field of fingerprinting. Kasi yung mga term na ito yung mga ginagamit natin doon sa pag-qualify pag-label ng ating mga fingerprint impressions na nakukuha. By the way, what are fingerprint impressions? So, yung tinatawag nating fingerprint impressions are those prints na produced by the action of touching, or when there is a contact between the fingers and the object, meron na iiwan doon na impression, at yun yung mga tinatawag nating fingerprint impression. Basta mahawakan natin yung isang object na it will leave mark onto that object. Meron siyang impression na naiiwan doon sa object na yan, at yan yung mga tinatawag nating fingerprint impression. So there are two classification or two kinds of fingerprint impression. Yung tinatawag nating real impressions and chance impressions. The difference between real impression and chance impression is whether or not they are intended to be left there, no? Kung sinadya ba silang iwanan or ilagay doon sa isang object na yan. So, yung real impression na tinatawag natin, yan yung mga impression na kung saan the owner of the fingerprints is consciously leaving his fingerprint impression to a certain object. So, ito yung mga halimbawa nito is, we have the image there, no? Pasensya na masyado maliit, palakihin natin. So, ito yung affidavit of consent, no? You are familiar already with the different types of document, I guess, na kung saan kailangan nating mag-attach ng ating mga thumb mark and so on. So, as we discussed in the subject, thumb mark is like an alternative of our signature. So, it vouch our identity, kasi ginagamit naman talaga natin siya as a means of personal identification. So, yung mga documents na ito, na kung saan nagre-require sila ng mga thumb mark and so on, which we, as the owner of the fingerprint, consciously or intentionally leave our fingerprint impression onto that document. So, that is an example of the real impression. Basta ang tignan natin dito, pag sinabi nating real impression is sinadya ng tao, ng may-ari ng fingerprint na yan, na iwanan yung kanyang fingerprint onto that specific object, no, or document. And that is different from the classification which known as the chance impression. Ang chance impression kasi, guys, the owner of the fingerprints has no intention of leaving his fingerprint marks at a certain object or at a certain document. It just happened that probably um, hindi siya conscious with regards to these different things, no? Specifically on the concept of fingerprinting. So, fingerprint identification. Which is, ito yung usually na-encounter natin when it comes to criminal investigation. Kasi nga, if hindi conscious yung mga perpetrator natin, yung mga culprits, criminals, if they're not conscious with regards to yung mga tinatawag nating forensic measures, na like fingerprints, na kung saan nag-commit sila ng crime, they don't wear any forensic, they don't wear any object that which may assist in hiding their identity, such as yung paggamit ng gloves. Hindi sila conscious sa mga ganun. So, bawat object na mahawakan nila, nagkakaroon doon ng fingerprint, and yun yung mga tinatawag nating chance impression, which is hindi nila sinadya na maglagay ng fingerprint doon sa mga object na to, but then because they touch the object, na meron at merong fingerprints na naiiwan. So yun yung mga tinatawag nating chance impression. The second image that we have there is a fingerprint impression left onto a certain car, na kung saan probably the perpetrator had come in contact with the car, na hawakan niya yung kotse, and that is why the fingerprints was left there, no, which was made visible upon the application of the different dusting powder na ginagamit sa fingerprint identification, sa field ng fingerprinting. So, yan yung mga pwede nating gamiting evidences na with regards to prosecuting a certain crime. And then, of course, for forensic expert, ito yung mga hinahanap nila, yung mga chance impression na kung saan pwedeng makatulong sa kanila sa pagresolba, no, at pag-identify ng mga taong involved doon sa isang krimen. Although real impressions are also used as an evidence in court, but with regards to criminal investigations, such as yung mga crime of robbery, crime of trespassing, and the like, ang commonly na na-encounter natin dyan is yung mga tinatawag nating chance impressions. Pagdating naman sa mga documents na kung saan, such as contracts, no, na kung saan is naglalagay ng thumb mark yung mga parties involved in a certain contracts, and dyan din pumapasok yung tinatawag nating real impression, no. Any of them, no, are both of them are actually significant in the field of fingerprinting, because pag real impression kasi maganda yan kasi buong-buo yung fingerprint na nakukuha, yung fingerprint impression na nakukuha natin, kasi nga sinadyang iwanan yung fingerprint mark na yon doon sa isang object or sa isang document. So buong-buo yon, compared doon sa mga tinatawag nating chance impression na kung saan minsan malabo, minsan kulang, at minsan hindi na useful yung mga impression na nakukuha because hindi naman sila conscious sa paglalagay ng mga fingerprints, or in simple term, hindi nila sinadya na lagyan ng mga fingerprint impressions yung mga object na ito. That's why sometimes yung mga na-produce or nako-collect na mga chance impressions are incomplete, deteriorated, or sometimes even damaged. So mayroon silang kanya-kanyang strength with regards to or in the field of fingerprint identification, kasi nga both of them have different characteristic, okay, and they are both useful. So I hope we are clear with regards to the different kinds of fingerprint impressions. Real impressions intended to be left out at a certain object, while chance impressions, those are unintended, unconsciously left onto that object, by a certain person. So yun yung pagkakaiba nila. Then let's proceed to the different kinds of chance impression. Kanina pinag-usapan natin yung kinds of fingerprint impression, and nabanggit doon yung tinatawag nating chance impression. So, to follow that up, meron din tayong mga different kinds of chance impression na tinatawag. And number one, yung tinatawag nating visible prints. Ang visible prints na tinatawag, if you can see yung topmost picture there, no? These are prints that are left into a certain object, no? Into a certain scene, at a crime scene, that are not intended, no? And they are clearly visible. Hindi natin pwedeng masabi na sinadyang iwan yan kasi kitang-kita siya doon sa crime scene. The only thing that make it visible is that probably the person who owns the fingerprint has come in contact with a certain substance na may kulay at nahawakan niya yon at naihawak niya rin sa isang object, kaya meron naiiwan na tinatawag nating visible prints. Halimbawa, yung perpetrator na merong nalagyan ng dugo yung kanyang kamay at it happens na napahawak siya sa isang object such as pwedeng halimbawa isang papel, nakahawak siya ng papel na may dugo-dugo yung kanyang kamay, then chances are magkakaroon ng tinatawag nating visible prints, no? Yung makikita mo yung fingerprints without adding any substances para maging visible siya. Which means readily na available at nakikita mo yung mga details ng fingerprint doon sa crime scene, no? And this usually happens kapag nakakahawak ng mga substances yung perpetrator, na kung saan yung mga substances ito has colors or capable of making the prints or fingerprints impression visible, no? O di kaya naman nakahawak siya ng langis, madumi yung kanyang kamay, naihawak niya sa isang baso, naihawak niya sa isang clear surface, mga ganon. Syempre makikita doon agad-agad yung fingerprints niya without even processing the fingerprint patterns. Okay? So yun yung tinatawag nating visible prints. Kung kitang-kita agad yung mga prints doon sa isang object or doon sa crime scene without developing the prints. So yan yung visible prints na tinatawag. Then we have yung tinatawag nating plastic prints. What are plastic prints na tinatawag? These are prints that are found on objects such as yung mga plastic materials, no, made out of plastic materials, cellophane, mga ganun. Actually, with regards to plastic prints, they can be semi-visible or visible at visible. So, ang prints kasi na iwan sa isang plastic sheets sometimes can be visible, no, depending on how are we looking upon it. So, yung merong tinatawag na oblique angle na kung saan is medyo pa diagonal yung pagtingin natin doon sa object na yan, pwedeng nakikita natin yung fingerprints doon without even processing it, no? Let's say for example, you touch the screen of your phone, no? Pag nahawakan mo yung screen ng phone mo at tinignan mo ito ng medyo mababa, medyo kumbaga is on diagonal angle, no, o yung oblique angle na tinatawag natin, nakikita mo yung fingerprint impression doon kahit hindi mo siya lagyan ng fingerprint powder or kahit hindi mo lagyan ng powder na kung saan pwedeng makapag-produce or makapagpa-visible doon sa kulay, doon sa fingerprint impression na nandoon sa screen ng phone mo, no? Depende lang kung paano mo siya tignan. Kung pa-diagonal mo siya tignan, makikita mo siya. So that's the characteristic of plastic prints, no? They can either be visible or semi-visible, or they can totally be hidden, no? So plastic prints, ang tandaan lang natin with regards to plastic prints is these are prints that are found on plastic objects or objects that are made out of plastic materials, no? Napakagandang source ng fingerprint impression yung mga plastic materials na yun kasi number one, madali siyang makuha madali siyang ma-process, no? Madali siyang palabasin at madali siyang i-lift, no? Kunin from the object and transfer it to the fingerprint cards. So yun yung kagandahan pag ang fingerprint ay naiiwan doon sa mga object made out of plastic material. So commonly dito yung mga mineral bottle na kung saan is pwedeng may makuha kang mga ganong mga object doon sa crime scene, and take into consideration of collecting those different objects kasi they may contain fingerprint impressions, no? Plastic cups, plastic utensils, mga ganon. Those are very important evidences or objects that can be collected at the crime scene, at pwede rin tayong makakuha doon ng mga fingerprint impressions. Kaya tignan nating maigi yung mga ganitong mga objects na present sa crime scene. Okay? Then lastly, we have yung tinatawag nating latent print. The latent prints are invisible prints. Hindi siya agad nakikita without processing it. So may mga prints tayong naiiwan sa mga surface, sa mga object na hindi natin agad nakikita kasi number one, hindi siya nakahawak ng kahit anong substance na pwedeng maglagay ng kulay doon sa kanyang fingerprint impression. Number two, hindi siya nailagay hindi siya found on a certain object made out of plastic, kaya hindi siya readily visible or hindi siya semi-visible. So these latent prints are also very important in the field of criminal investigation. Why? Because they usually contains a lot of information themselves, no? Such as for example, sa mga doorknobs natin. Pag cases ng burglary or yung robbery na tinatawag na kung saan pinasok yung bahay nyo, no? Hanapin mo kung saan pumasok yung criminal, no? At doon ka maghanap ng mga possible fingerprints. Halimbawa, dumaan siya sa bintana. Kung meron siyang binasag na salamin, meron siyang sinirang bintana, there's a high chances that you can find latent prints therein. No? Kung halimbawa sa kotse, ninakawan yung kotse mo, pwedeng merong mga prints na naiwan doon sa loob mismo ng kotse kung saan siya naggalugad ng mga objects na merong halaga, at pwede ka ring makahanap ng mga material, ng mga impressions doon mismo sa point of entry kung saan siya pumasok doon sa kotse. Okay? And those prints are usually not readily visible. Kailangan mo yung i-process. Kaya nga tayo gumagamit siya ng tinatawag nating fingerprint powder, either black powder, white powder, or other types of fingerprint powder na kailangang i-apply dyan para nang sa ganun is makita natin kung saan yung mga fingerprint impressions na yan. So that is yung tinatawag nating latent print. Ito yung mga prints that are not readily visible. They are not visible, no? But after the impressions are processed with the use of different substances, no, they will be visible. No? So yun yung ina-applyan natin ng fingerprint powder. So we have the illustration here. Itong glass bottle na ito na kung saan is pre-process nila, pinowder nila, nag-dusting silang tinatawag. So yung mga hindi natin nakikita ng mga fingerprints doon sa object na ito, sa glass bottle na ito, ay naging visible siya with the use of different instrument, with the use of different substances na ina-apply para ma-produce yung mga fingerprint natin na hindi agad natin nakikita. No? The characteristic of those prints that are not readily visible to the naked eye until processing are known as the latent prints. Okay? So I do hope that the kinds of chance impressions are already clear to everyone. Let us now proceed to the last topic, which is the methods of producing fingerprint impression. Okay? So we have two methods of producing fingerprint impression. Yung tinatawag nating plain method, and we have the rolled method. We have here an illustration. Itong nasa taas niya, yung 10 fingerprint impressions there sa taas niya are known as the rolled impression. Dung nasa baba niya, yung 10 din na nandyan, na mas mapapayat are known as the plain impression. No? Why are what is the difference between these two fingerprint impression? So the difference is with regards to how they are produced. No? Yung plain impression na yan is made through just impressing the fingers, no, through a medium or to a medium such as halimbawa papers. So halimbawa nilagyan mo ng fingerprint ink yung buong kamay niya, then i-impress mo lang siya, idikit mo lang siya, no? Idiin mo lang siya doon sa object, then it will produce already yung tinatawag nating plain impression. And the process of doing that is yung tinatawag nating true plain method, no? While the rolled method, no, talks about the process of coming up with the rolled impression. Yung rolled impression na to are taken individually, no? Kung papansinin nyo, medyo mas malapad yung fingerprint pattern pag gumamit tayo ng rolled impression. And the reason for that is that to give more material for the examiner to observe at, no? So pag rolled impression kasi siya, medyo mas napapalapad, no, yung fingerprint natin at mas nagiging clear yung mga details na pwedeng makita natin doon sa fingerprint pattern na yan. No, with regards to ridge counting, ridge tracing, and so on, mas visible yung mga details na yan pag gumamit tayo ng rolled impression or rolled method, no, of producing fingerprint impression. Kaya pagdating sa ridge counting and ridge tracing, ang pinagbabasehan dyan is yung tinatawag nating rolled impressions, no? And they are produced by rolling the fingers, the bulb of the finger, the topmost part of the finger, no, from one side to other side. So yung nasa taas nga, sabi ko, etong mga nasa taas na ito are known as the rolled impressions. Now, why do we need to get also the plain impression, yung image natin dito sa baba? The reason for that under fingerprint classification is that they are using or they're taking the plain impression, no, para ma-substantiate yung arrangement kung tama nga ba yung pagkakasunod-sunod ng mga fingerprint natin doon sa fingerprint card natin. So as you can see, yung rolled impressions are taken individually. So, merong chances kasi na magkabaliktad. Halimbawa, yung dapat nasa middle finger na punta or yung pattern, yung impression ng middle finger mo na punta sa iyong ring finger and so on. So, to verify that, kinukuha rin natin yung plain impression ng subject natin doon sa fingerprint card na yan para makita natin yung tamang pagkakasunod-sunod ng mga fingerprint impressions doon sa mismong kamay ng tao. So that's the reason. That's one of the reason why they are taking the plain impression of the subject in the fingerprint card. Okay? So these two are the methods of producing fingerprint patterns, no? Plain method and rolled method, no? Ang plain method, nagpro-produce yan ng plain impression, and then ang rolled method, nagpro-produce yan ng rolled impression. So that's it for this lecture, guys. I do hope you learned something with regards to the topic that we discussed. If you have questions and clarification about this topic, kindly comment those down on the comment section and I'll try to get back to you soon. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you for listening. See you on the next lecture.